This is video 3 in our Schedule C series. And so in this video, we're talking about part 2 of Form Schedule C, which is the expenses section. Okay, jumping in. As you can see here in the heading for part 2, it says expenses, and then after that, it says enter expenses for business use of your home only on line 30. And the word only is in bold, because they really want to make sure that you don't miss that word here. And so what that's saying is, okay, in part 2, you're going to input the expenses related to your business. But if any of those expenses are related to the business use of your home, all of those expenses should go on line 30. And line 30 is down here, right? It's underneath this separator line here, and it has its own section, and it says expenses for business use of your home. Do not report these expenses elsewhere. Attach Form 8829 unless using the simplified method. See instructions. So before we get started inputting all of our expenses, the form really wants you to know these expenses here in part 2, these will not include expenses related to using your home for your daycare. All of those expenses will be reported on line 30. Okay, so starting at the top, line 9 says advertising. So here you're going to input any expenses related to advertising your business. Line 8 says advertising. So on line 8, you'll input expenses related to advertising your business. Line 9 says car and truck expenses. So this is going to include things like mileage, and there's actually some additional information that you have to include here. It says see instructions. So you'll want to make sure that, again, when you're completing Form Schedule C, that you have the instructions pulled up, maybe on a separate screen or in a separate window. There is an entire PDF that is just instructions for completing Form Schedule C. You want to have that pulled up. It's going to be super handy as you're doing this. If you have any questions about the specific line items, generally the instructions are going to contain the information that you need to answer those questions so that you can complete this form correctly. So moving on, line 10 says commissions and fees. That's fairly self-explanatory. If you've paid some kind of commission to someone, maybe a sales commission or some other type of fee related to running your daycare, you can input that here. Line 11 says contract labor. So if you have a daycare assistant or a teacher that's working with you in your daycare who is not an employee, maybe this person just comes in for a few hours a week. Maybe this person comes in and teaches your daycare children yoga, or maybe they do some kind of dance lesson with your children. If that person is a contractor, you'll want to enter any amounts that you pay them here on line 11 next to contractor labor. On line 12, you'll want to input depletion. Generally, you're not going to see this field completed as it relates to home-based daycares or center daycare. So generally, line 12 will be blank. And then line 13 says depreciation, and section 179 expense deduction, not included in part 3, see instructions. And again here, because it says see instructions, that's a good indication that completing this line item is going to require that you understand something other than just what's listed here. So you want to make sure that you read the instructions and complete this field accordingly. And so what I'll say about this is that there are very specific rules about what can be depreciated and how much can be depreciated and when. And there's also a separate just depreciation calculation that generally is going to be attached to your Form 1040 that's going to go behind Schedule C related to depreciation deductions that you're taking for your business. So you want to make sure that you're completely filling that out and that you're filling it out correctly. That's a little outside the scope of this video, but I'll very likely do a separate video just on depreciation and kind of an overview of that at a later point in time. So line 14, employee benefit programs other than on line 19. If we look at line 19, it says pension and profit sharing plans. So if you have some kind of employee benefit program, maybe you offer them some kind of retirement plan or some kind of add-on benefit to maybe their health insurance, you could input that here on line 14. Line 15 says insurance other than health, right? So that's kind of reiterating, hey, if this is health insurance for someone else, don't put that here. You'll likely put that on line 14. But on line 15, you can put insurance related to operating your daycare. So liability insurance for your daycare would go here on line 15. On line 16, it says interest, and then it says see instructions. And so again, you'll want to make sure that you read the instructions as it relates to, what is allowable deductible interest, and you want to make sure you're only picking up the correct amount here. This is generally not going to include your mortgage interest. That's generally going to be included on line 30 because it's an expense related to the business use of your home. But if you're paying interest related to something like maybe a loan you took out to be able to furnish your daycare or something like that, you could list that here. Personal interest, I want to note, is not deductible. So if you have personal interest related to something outside of your daycare, personal interest as a rule is generally not deductible. And so again, make sure you read the instructions as it relates to what is allowable and deductible interest expense related to your business. Okay. And then here on line 16, row A, it says mortgage. So mortgage interest paid to banks. And again, that is going to be only if you have a separate mortgage related to a separate building for your daycare. This is not going to be mortgage interest related to your home because again, that goes on line 30. And then it says interest other. So if you have some other kind of line of credit, or something that you finance that you're paying interest on related to your daycare, you can put that here. And then on line 17, legal and professional fees. And so that's going to include fees that you pay to an attorney. Hopefully you have an attorney that you can consult with whenever you have questions about issues arising in your daycare or just about how to protect yourself as a daycare owner operator. The fees that you pay to that attorney would go here on line 17, legal and professional services. If you're using a CPA, the fees that you pay to your CPA would go here. Very important to make sure that you're working with a licensed CPA, and if you are, the fees that you pay them would go here on line 17. And then here on line 18, it says office expense, and then it says see instructions. And so if you have an expense related to an office that maybe you're using for your daycare, you could input some of that expense here. And you want to make sure that because it says see instructions, that you're reading the instructions so that you can make sure that you're really only picking up what it's asking for here. And then, so office expense is going to be, potentially there's some kind of fee related to maybe a place that you're renting, not the rent expense itself, but maybe as a part of being in the office, you have to pay, I don't know, some kind of fee for, having the trash taken out, or some kind of fee related to maintenance of the space that isn't a fee for the use of the space itself. Something like that could go here. These categories aren't necessarily always hard and fast. So something that can go in office expense could also potentially go in a field like where it says rent or lease or even supplies. There is some gray area with some of these categories, not with all of them, but with some of them. And office expense is certainly one of those categories. So line 19, pension and profit sharing plans. That's fairly self-explanatory. If you have a pension or a profit sharing plan for your business and you have expenses related to that, input those on line 19. Line 20, rent or lease. And then it says see instructions. So you want to, read the instructions related to this. And then it says, line 20A, vehicle, machinery, and equipment. And then line 20B, other business property. So if you're paying to separately rent some equipment or even to rent a space for your daycare, and it's not a space that you also use for your home, then you could input that amount here on line 20B. And then if you're paying to rent, some kind of vehicle or machinery for your business, and it's 100% used in your business, then you would input that amount here on line 20A. So I don't know what you would rent, but maybe you're renting a snowblower. Maybe your daycare is located in the Midwest, and you have to rent a snowblower to clean off, the driveway of your daycare every year. Then you could input that here. Again, that would be if you had a commercial center. This would not relate to a snowblower that you rented for your home, because again, that would be a shared expense. And then that would most likely need to go on line 30. Okay, so line 21, repairs and maintenance. That's just what it sounds like. If you had to make some kind of repair or maintenance to your business and you had costs associated with that, that would go here on line 21. So this can include things like cleaning fees, right? So if you have a company that comes in to sanitize your commercial center or to clean your commercial center once or twice a week or once or twice a month, those amounts could go here. Line 22, supplies, and it says supplies not included in part 3. We'll get to part 3 later, but if you have supplies related to your daycare, those could go here on line 22. These would be supplies that were 100% purchased for your daycare. So this wouldn't include like shared expense type supplies. Like maybe you purchase cleaning supplies and you're using a portion of them, in your daycare, but you're also using them to clean your home. Those amounts wouldn't go here. Those amounts would be picked up elsewhere, right? And it says not included in part 3. So you could potentially make the case for including those amounts on line 30 if you wanted. But so long as it's 100% being used in your daycare, then the supplies can go here on line 22. And then if the supplies were being partially used, for your home, then, and you wanted to include them on line 22, you would just pick up the portion related to using them in your business, right? So you would have to apply your time space percentage in this scenario. So if you purchased cleaning supplies that were $100 and maybe your time space percentage is 10%, then you would just pick up the $10 here. And I have a longer video on my channel that you can see just about how to calculate your time space percentage. I also have a really easy to use tool that I've created specifically for home daycare owner operators if you would like some help with calculating your time space percentage. So moving on, line 23, taxes and licenses. So this is not going to include your personal income taxes, right? And this is also not going to include amounts that you have to pay to the IRS at the end of the year or to your state's revenue board at the end of the year. So no income taxes can go here. But if you have to pay a licensing fee every year to renew your daycare's, operating license, or if you have to pay a tax related to maybe sales tax or something related to something that you purchased in your business, that could go here. Sometimes to have an LLC, there's generally an annual fee that you have to pay. That amount would go here on line 23. But again, personal income taxes are not deductible. And those amounts would not go on line 23. So line 24 says travel and meals. And then there is an A and a B. So line 24A says travel. So if you had to travel and that travel is related to your business, that amount would go on line 24A. That's going to be separate from the amounts that you've listed on line 9, right? Line 9 is car and truck expenses. Travel is going to be separate from that. So this would be things like maybe you had to stay overnight at a hotel, or maybe you had some kind of conference that you had to go to. You could list a portion of that here on line 20A. And again, these categories are not always hard and fast. Some of them are, but travel isn't necessarily hard and fast. It could be the case that you could classify something as travel, but someone else could say, oh, well, actually, I think this is more closely aligned with, I don't know, a training fee or another category of expense. And so deductible meals is line 24B, and it says see instructions. So you want to make sure that you read the instructions. There are very specific and very strict rules about what you can deduct as a business meal. Generally, the rule is that meals are 50% deductible and 50% non-deductible. So if you if you have a meal expense, related to, I don't know, for instance, if you purchase lunch for yourself because you have to work late at your center, generally that meal is going to be subject to the deductibility rules. Oh my goodness, I can't talk. And so I'll do a separate video just about deductible meal expense, when meals are 50% deductible, when the cost of meals or food could be deductible to a larger percentage, such as 100%. I'll do a separate video on that. But it's important to know that whenever you're talking about meals expense, you want to scrutinize it. And there's a test that you should apply to determine how much of your meals you can deduct. Generally, it's not going to be 100%. Generally, it's going to be 50%. Sometimes meals are even non-deductible. So important to note that and read the instructions. And then on line 25, utilities. And so utilities is fairly self-explanatory. Again, you're going to be deducting utilities related to a commercial center. If you have utilities related to your home daycare, your family daycare, you're going to pick up those amounts in line 30. Line 26 is wages less employment credit. So if you have bona fide employees, W-2 employees that you're paying via payroll, who are working with you in your daycare, that amount is deductible on line 26. You should not include amounts that you are taking out as the owner, right? Because this is a sole proprietorship or a single member LLC, amounts that you're paying yourself are not deductible. Do not include those amounts on line 26. That would not be correct. And then on line 27, we have other expenses from line 48 on line 27A. And then on line 27B, it says energy efficient commercial buildings deduction. We're not going to cover that during this series of videos. That's really outside the scope of a lot of what we're looking at as daycare owner operators. But line 27A, other expenses from line 48, that lets you know that you need to look at line 48 to see what it's talking about there. And so line 48 is just kind of a catch-all for anything that doesn't fit into these categories above it. And so I'll just kind of scroll down there to line 48 so you can see. So line 48 is part 5, other expenses. And so you would list all of the other expenses here. So anything that wasn't included on lines 8 through 26 or line 27B or line 30 above, all of those amounts get separately listed out here. So you describe the expense here to the left, you list the amount here to the right. It gets totaled up on line 48 here, and then you carry that back up here and you input it on line 27A. Okay, and that is part 2, expenses. And we're actually going to have to separate this out into a second video because I realize now that this video is getting to be very long. And so you can check out the remaining section of part 2. I'll be explaining that in my next video.